Well, good evening. It's so lovely to have you here. I have currently moved to a new place, and while I haven't escaped the snow, hopefully I will enjoy this place more, just as I hope you will enjoy these stories that I have narrated for you all. So, without further ado, grab yourself a snack, sit back and relax, and hope that tonight will not be your last. A couple years ago, I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work at my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it even calls for snow and grocery stores are raided the nights before. I had decided to go and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend since the mayhem had ended and only people like me who had trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around. I went into Walmart and got the groceries I needed and started my way back to the truck. It had started to snow harder and there was already about 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was about noon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies the next couple days with my girlfriend. Just then, as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm. As I turned around, I saw an older-looking lady who was maybe 5'6". She asked me if I had cigarettes. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her I did not, and turned back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged on my arm, and she told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment and wanted money for a hotel. Again, I honestly told her I had no money on me, which I purposely do because I don't like donating to people's drug habits. At this point, she said, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of the situation, I said, "No, I did not," which was a lie, thinking she'd now leave me alone. Then she asked, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet up with my granddaughter? It's right up the road there. I can show you." Me being a Christian and was always taught to help people out, so even though everything at this moment told me to deny this woman again, I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, being a male at 6 foot, I figured I could take her if things got dicey. So she jumped in my truck against all odds, and the next thing I know, she's smoking a cigarette in my truck, and I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette since she obviously had some. She obliged and threw the cigarette out the window to my dismay. So we started driving up the road towards her hotel, at which I was on high alert. At the moment of going through worst-case scenarios in my head, I noticed her fumbling through her purse, searching for something and looking out the corner of her eye at me. At which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so don't try anything crazy." Now, I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of my back seat a couple days earlier, and in reality, this would do me no good if she pulled a gun on me at that instant. At this point, she stopped messing around in her purse and pulled out her cell phone in her pocket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from some friends." Okay, at this point, red flags were firing off, but again, never judging a book by its cover kept running through my mind. So I told her that it was fine, but we had to make it quick because I needed to make it home. At that moment, she dialed someone on the phone and said, "Yeah, this guy's coming over to bring me to get the stuff. You ready, right?" At that point, I asked her if I could talk with the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he's been chain-smoking said "Hello." I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" and asked him if he knew any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over his words and said he had to go. At this point, I should have gotten a clue and kicked her out of my car, especially after watching so many horror movies. This is when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. But for fear of her actually telling the truth and me feeling like a terrible person, I decided to go on. At this point, we turned down the street and I saw a cop car sitting there off the side. I wanted to go drop her off with the cop, but I would be terrible if she was actually telling the truth. So I passed the cop at this point with a weird, eerie smile on her face and said, "Glad he's here now. I feel safe." Now, as we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down. Just a very unsettling place, even during the snow. As I parked outside the place, she said it was her friends. She said, "Okay, I'll go get the guy and be back." At this point, I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to just get the heck out of there, and she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I left her there in this weather under her condition. At this, I got mad. After all, I went out of my way to help her. As I waited, I started to think about things that could happen. What if she brought back a gun or worse? At that moment, I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realized things were not right. She had set me up to rob me or something because these guys were big and one of them had something behind his back which I couldn't see. At that moment, I put it in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. I looked back to them chasing me and to see that what was hidden behind the one guy's back was a crowbar. I didn't know what would have happened to me, but now looking back, I see how dumb and blind I was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area I was in. The nearest motel was 20 minutes away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they probably would have beaten me and robbed me, or worse. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to get married and tell this event. After that, I have never been to that Walmart ever again, or the area for that matter. A couple of months later, I told a coworker this story and he told me that a year ago the same lady tried the same thing on him, but he declined altogether, which was a smart move on his part. So, horrible lady who lied about having breast cancer to trick people into awful things. I hope you get what's coming to you and let's never meet again. So be careful who you help out because some people will take advantage of you. Or even worse. So just over 10 years ago, I was fresh out of college and had moved back to my parents' house for the free rent and food for 9 months or so before I was leaving the state for graduate school. Now my parents are super chill and gave me my own space in the house, but being a 22-year-old single guy and living at a house in the sticks is certainly not ideal. But I didn't have any other options, so I started looking for some work more to pass the time and save more money. Anyway, so summer turned to winter, and I still hadn't found anything solid, but by then I desperately needed to spend more time out of my parents' house. So I took a part-time gig doing some light bookkeeping for a small business owner that my dad knew. I didn't really want to do it since it didn't pay much, was short-term, and wasn't even a real office setup, but again, since my parents lived in the middle of nowhere Midwest, I think I had limited local opportunities to make some cash, and this guy was going to pay me under the table as well. About that same time, a friend of mine in the city said that if I paid him just $200 a month and helped clean up, he'd basically let me crash in his living room until I was ready to move out of state. That was all I needed to hear. I took the job. So my dad's friend's family had a construction type business. They helped out with the building stuff a little, but it was ultimately more focused on renting out a few bobcats and large augers they owned. And other various drills and then odds and ends like generators and other low-level constructions or farming equipment that someone in that area couldn't afford to purchase but needed to use from time to time. This was a small mom and pop type thing where everyone knew everyone and the office only opened on days that when someone was coming by, and was just generally a mutually beneficial situation for the business owners and the locals. Since I had minored in a business adjacent area and my dad recommended me, they trusted me to go in there for about 15 to 20 hours a week and check and file the rental forms, make sure nobody missed a payment date if there was a payment plan in place, answer an email or two discussing prices and availability. Super easy gig. The old building where I worked was about 90 years old and at the top of this little hill, and the downstairs used to be an old country bar until the 1970s when this family bought it cheap, cleared out the bar, and fenced in the property to use its parking lot area to store all their rental equipment and gear. I could generally come and go as I pleased, worked any hours I wanted to as long as the work got done, so if things were slow and there wasn't any rentals for a couple days, I'd usually go in after 7 and stay until around midnight or 1. Since I knew I'd be alone and could listen to music loud and take my time and all that. The office where I worked was on the second floor of the building above the old bar and looked out onto the long driveway. From my seat, I could easily see out the window and once or twice saw a family of deer or a raccoon scamper by, and I always glanced out when I saw movement since it was very noticeable. It was incredibly remote, very still and quiet, so if something unusual occurred or something felt off, I definitely noticed it. One night during winter, it had snowed a few inches and my dad told me to stay in because the roads were bad. But I had an old SUV and more than that, just really wanted to get out of the house. So I went into work at about 8 p.m. and was going to stay just after 1. I always left the gate open at the bottom of the hill since believe me when I say that nobody ever showed up at night since we were literally in the middle of nowhere. I think the nearest occupied house was about 2 miles down the road, and to even turn onto our short road you had to only be coming to our specific building and probably know it was there beforehand. It was a locals only type thing and very small since the family had inherited a lot of money and kind of did this rental thing on the side. Basically, someone would never just get lost and end up at our building. So I'm jamming away to some Fall Out Boy, everyone makes mistakes when they're young, and having some coffee and kept glancing at the snow outside here and there, since our one orangish streetlight reflected onto the ground at the gate and was causing the light to shine off the snow in a really cool way. At one point around midnight, I went downstairs to the big bathroom to do my bathroom business, and then came back upstairs and got settled back into my work. I probably did about 5 minutes of work when I glanced outside and I saw a huge imprint of something in the fresh snow just below the light. It seemed like it must have been a huge dog or substantial animal had just rolled around on the ground there on its back or something. Since I didn't notice it just 15 minutes before, it had to have happened when I was in the bathroom or maybe when my back was turned, since I would have seen that type of movement for sure. I shook it off and assumed a dog or maybe even a farm animal had gotten loose and maybe was attracted to the light or something. Who knows? At around 2 in the morning I was leaving, and as always got out of my car to lock the gate up. And to be honest, I had pretty much forgotten about the imprint in the snow. But when I looked down, I was shocked to see that it wasn't just some disturbed snow, but it was undeniably the imprint of a human-made snow angel. If you don't know what a snow angel is, it's when kids lie on their back in the snow and push their arms and legs back and forth, so when they get up it looks like the outline of an angel. I used to do this when I was a kid, so I 100% knew for sure that's what it was, and it was deliberately made underneath the light post. But it wasn't from a kid, it was from a large person, or, at the very least, a normal size adult, wearing tons of layers of big winter clothing. I looked up and saw what I already knew, that whoever had made the snow angel could easily look up and have seen me through that window. So they must have waited for me to head downstairs to make this angel. Now, I definitely would have seen or heard if someone drove up to our building, even if I was in the bathroom. So I knew someone had to have walked deep into the freezing cold and snow for a few miles, stopped in front of our building, and then do a snow angel in the small amount of time I wasn't sitting in my front desk of my window. I glanced around for tracks in the snow and saw that there was one set that led to the nearby woods to the right of the building, so it was clear the person didn't use the road, but instead came from the opposite side, which made me instantly uneasy, since that side was just trees and darkness for miles and miles. I was definitely a little freaked out now once I realized that someone had just been this close to me secretly out in the middle of the woods. And I looked around but didn't see anything amiss all, and now just wanted to get the hell out of there. When I got back in my car and drove a few feet, I realized that my boss would be there in about 4 hours, and might see the snow angel and assume I did it, since he probably assumed I kept the gate locked when I was there. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal at all, but I was young and felt like I might be made fun of by him if nothing else. So I opened the back gate real quick, ran over and kicked the snow around so it hid the angel, locked it up again, and went back to my car. I wasn't exactly fully terrified at this point, even though it was certainly unsettling. I just thought it was really weird and could have been an illegal hunter. Either way, the imprint was made 2 hours earlier and I assumed they were long gone. But that's when I heard it. When I was getting into my SUV, there was the loudest, high-pitched laughing coming from the woods. It almost sounded like a fake laugh, like the Witch and Wizard of Oz or something. Like someone who was doing it fake on purpose to show they weren't scared of me or how I'd react at all once I knew they were laughing at me on our property. It was close enough that I knew they could probably see me, but I couldn't see them at all since, other than the streetlight I was under, there was no illumination. After a few seconds of laughing, they stopped, and then it was just silence everywhere, except for my heart beating through my ears. Then the laughing started again, though louder this time, more like screaming and laughing combined. I sort of froze for just 5 seconds, listening in a panic. Now, I've spent a lot of time in that area, and I know what coyotes and foxes sound like at night with their high-pitched screeches during mating season, so I can't completely logistically rule that out. But to me, it honestly felt that like it was an adult man trying to emulate a woman laughing. Like someone was deliberately trying to make a fake scary shriek laugh in order to scare someone. Well, it really worked. After that 5 seconds, I immediately, filled with adrenaline, got in my car and drove away from there as fast as I could without sliding off the road. Back at home, I was up all night trying to figure it out and told my parents the story when they woke up. After talking it out, we all decided it was one of two things. It was either my brain somehow convinced itself that the snow formation was angel-shaped when it was really just caused by some animal, and then the snow tracks and laughing was just a coyote or a fox. Though I don't think that's what it was. What I truly believe, the second thing, which is that some local was out walking around for some reason and decided to mess with me. I didn't have any close friends left in that area that would do this, and if they did, they would certainly have brought it up later to make fun of me for speeding away in terror. I found out later that the nearest house was a super old couple, so I highly doubt it was one of them, which means whoever it was went out in the woods in the night in the freezing cold just to mess with a stranger. I don't have any mental issues or a family history of them. I didn't do drugs. I drank socially at that time, but certainly didn't at night. I also don't believe in the paranormal, so I never once gave that a thought. In my heart, I know someone was out there. I worked there another 6 weeks or so and never had a single issue, though I knew where my boss kept his gun and I always made sure it was there when I started my shift. And I certainly always locked the gate from then on. Thinking about this experience that night, the part that freaked me out the most was that he had to have waited around for me to leave for about 2 hours, just to do that laugh. He didn't know me. I could have been crazy and the type of person to get mad and try to find and attack him. Yet, he didn't seem to care while he tried to mess with me. For some random dude, this is probably a story he tells from his point of view to make all of his friends giggle hysterically. But for me, that dude, the one I call Angel in the Snow guy, the one with the laugh, I'll never forget. Two years ago, I was the last person left in my college apartment before the winter holidays. I had a final the next morning, a short shift at work, and then I was headed home. Because of this, I was awake around 3 in the morning, watching TV and studying. Out of nowhere, I hear this pounding on the front door. This is very, very odd. I'm the only one left out of 4 girls in the apartment. Most of the complex is gone because they finished finals early, and I live on the top floor of the building, closest to the main office. I sneak up to answer the door, wondering if it's one of my roommates. My room is closest to the front door, so it's all of 3 steps to peek through the peephole. There's about 5 people outside, 4 guys and 1 girl. All of the men were shirtless, and some of them were wearing shorts. It's about 20 degrees and snowing outside. Most of them were hanging back on the walkway, but the man who was knocking on the door was bent over it, one arm up against the door and leaving his other hand free to just pound on the door. I heard them talking, but couldn't make out any words. For some reason, the girl unnerved me the most. Let's just recap. 3 in the morning, mostly empty apartment complex. 5 people, shirtless, banging repeatedly on my door, all while it's snowing. Needless to say, I just pretended I wasn't there, even as I stood watching them through the peephole. I think I ran off to mute my TV just in case. They stayed there for about 5 minutes while the one guy knocked on the door, but finally left and headed farther down the walkway. I still have no idea what they were on about, and didn't sleep very well that night. I'm a 21-year-old female, and this story took place when I was around 11. I remember this day clearly because it was the first time I was ever allowed to walk to school and back by myself. Up until the age of 14, I lived in what we thought was a safe place in Chicota County, New York. Everyone knew everyone. If you thought you would get away with something, then be prepared to have your ear abused by the time you got home. There was this one day though. It was a cold winter day and school unfortunately was still open, so all the neighborhood kids had to walk through knee-high inches of snow just to get to school. It took me longer to leave the house as I was used to walking with my older sister to school since she knew the routes better than me. I always used to make fun of her for being paranoid and taking a different route every day from school. But after that day, I learned that was what saved my life. As I was waiting by the door to leave, my mom came up to me and told me that I should ride with her to drop me off because my sister was too sick to go today. Being a brat, I made a big deal about walking by myself because I was almost 12 years old, and all my friends' parents let them walk alone. She looked at me for a long while, then told me to make sure I pay attention to cars. I got hit by a car and almost died when I was 9, so the worry that showed on her face was well warranted. I hurriedly nodded and headed out the door to go to school. My sister didn't like to dilly-dally, so she was always in a rush to get to school early, but seeing as it was just me, I thought it would be a good idea to take my time. I would play in the brown slush that was left on the side of the road and even make funny-looking snowballs to see how far I can throw them. Halfway to school, I noticed a white van following behind me. Being the playful child I was, if I had not been bending down to make another snowball, I wouldn't have noticed it slowly creeping up the street. I told myself I was being stupid, but continued more hurriedly to school. Once I got to school, I took a quick glance over my shoulder and saw the van a few feet behind me. It wasn't until I was on school grounds that it drove away fast by me. I thought that would be the end of it, but throughout the day when I would stare out the window, the van would be there. I assumed that it never really left, just parked. Many adults would try to convince me years later that maybe it wasn't the same one, but I knew it was. This van had a bright yellow smile emoji sticker on it. I couldn't see who was in the van, but through the tinted glass, I knew they could see me. It was now the end of the day, and I wasn't ready to go home. It was too late to call my mom because she was at work and my sister was homesick. I had to suck it up and start walking home. I tried to blend in with a group of kids, but most of them were car riders and the others didn't live near me. Remembering what my sister told me, I took another route home. I didn't memorize this route clearly, but I decided anything was better than being spotted by that van. I made it to my main street, but realized my mistake too late. The route I took led back to the main street where I walked to school. Hidden behind a row of cars was the white van with the smiley emoji sticker. I tried to stay calm and walk past it, but once I heard the van doors silently click open, I ran. I could hear the rush of 2 pairs of heavy feet falling behind me. They were getting closer, so I did what any normal kid would do. I cut corners. I cut into someone's backyard until I was directly inside of my house, and I forced myself into the thick snow to make it to the door. My heart was racing, not because I was running, but because I could still hear them behind me. I made it to the door and banged with all my might until someone came to the door. My sister looked confused, but one look at my face and she pulled me inside and locked the doors. The van was still outside. Truthfully, it stayed out there until my brother got home. Me and my sister don't talk about it, but we both knew how close it was to me going missing. I hadn't thought about this incident in years, but one of my hometown friends showed me an article that came out in 2013. Apparently some men kidnapped and assaulted a girl my age. It wouldn't have scared me if it hadn't mentioned the white van. This past winter, we had a pretty typical snowstorm here in New Jersey. I'm 17, I live at home with my parents and 2 brothers, and typically my brothers would take care of snow shoveling, but as luck would have it, both of them and my mother came down with the flu. I was taking care of them while they were ill, cooking and cleaning. My father was on a business trip and couldn't get a flight back to New Jersey, so the burden to shovel was on me. If you didn't clear your snow in my town, you can get fined pretty bad. You even have to dig out the fire hydrants. Now, I'm only about 5'5", 120 pounds, so I'm not one of those big, strong girls, but I can certainly handle shoveling the snow that fell, and like most high school girls, I'm pretty broke other than the money I make for my part-time job. About 15 minutes into shoveling, I had cleared off the driveway and one side of the sidewalk, and only had the other side of the sidewalk to finish. As I turned around to head and finish up, I noticed a very large, middle-aged man walking my way with a shovel in his hand. I know all my neighbors, so I knew this guy wasn't anyone who lived near me. He walked towards me with a huge, creepy smile, and I remember his teeth being so yellow. I just said hello, and he stopped and started talking to me.
Some storm, huh?
I just nodded and started to try to walk around him to continue my work. As I walked by him, I noticed he was trying to get me to look him in the eye because he dipped his head down a bit, and I just said, as rude girl as I could, "Excuse me," like as if to say, "Get out of my way." And then he said,
Sweetheart, I can't stand to see a young girl get put to work like this. Let me help you.
I told him I could manage, and he asked me 3 times if I was sure, which annoyed me, so I decided to just walk away from him and continue my shoveling, every couple seconds looking over my shoulder, and I noticed he was just standing there, watching me. I got annoyed, so I yelled out, "Can I help you?" He responded,
Can I help you?
and then laughed like a creep. So I tried a different approach in a nicer tone. "Sir, I'm pretty much done. I don't need any help. Please just leave me alone so I can finish." He then, to further annoy me, said,
Aw, come on. I charge $35 to do people's shoveling. For what's left, I will only charge $10.
As I mentioned earlier, I don't really have much money, so I just responded, "No sale. Take care," hoping he would get the message and walk away. I rounded the corner to finish the last 20 feet or so, and when I did, I noticed the guy was still standing there. This annoyed me, so I went into my house and told my mother and 2 brothers that some creepy guy was bothering me and staring at me. My oldest brother sprang to his feet and, in just a t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants, bolted out the front door, but the guy was gone. And when I say gone, he must have ran away when he saw me go inside for help, because my brother walked all the way down the block and he was nowhere to be seen. My brother questioned if I was making it all up, telling me he's annoyed because he isn't feeling well, but I swore to him that I was dead serious and said I didn't want to go back outside. Our neighbor finished the rest of the shoveling later that day for us after my mom explained to him what happened, and he said he would keep an eye out for anyone who fit the description I gave my mom. As I said, it's a small town where everyone knows each other, and I have never seen him before. Later that day, I had the world's worst case of induced nausea when I saw on Facebook that a 15-year-old girl from my town had gotten attacked by the very guy that was harassing me. The reason I know is because they had the picture of when he was booked in jail on the site. The girl was outside helping her father when the father took a break to go inside and use the bathroom. The man ran up to the residence, grabbed the girl, punched her several times in the face and body, and pulled a knife from his boot before the father, who saw the attack from the window, and that girl's neighbor who also was out shoveling, could break it up and also break his arm and restrain him when the police arrived. It turned out the guy was a schizophrenic who was off his meds and out for a stroll, and something about the girl set him off and he just went into attack mode, probably not even realizing what he was doing. It scares me so much to think that it could have been me, and I feel sick to my stomach knowing that girl could have been killed. But I'm so thankful that she had a situation where someone was watching over her before it was too late. I didn't have the same fortune.
It was early January, and just a few days before my birthday. The snow was deep and the streets were quiet, the front yard lit by the dying streetlights and the sliver of a moon. I had just come up from my room to get myself something to eat when I was met with an uncomfortable sighting. Across the road, a figure was making its way casually down the street. I tried to force down the lump in my throat as I observed the figure passing the house and nearly choked when it sped up. Walking on all fours, with snow up to their wrists, this man or woman, I still have yet to come to a conclusion, seemed to be either unaware of the strangeness of its posture or simply out of its mind. I turned away and hurried to the kitchen where I caught my breath. My heart and mind were racing, and the only thing I could continue to think was, it's probably some cracked out weirdo, but it's so cold outside. What if it's still walking down the street like that? Curious, but unable to bring myself to investigate further, I'm still uncertain as to whether this thing carried on the way it did for the rest of the way down the street. All I know for sure is that it was disturbing to see that, and unfortunately only the first weird thing to happen that night. Pulling myself together, doing what I had come upstairs to do, I got some food together and headed back down to my room. Still feeling a bit shaken, I decided to watch some upbeat videos on YouTube while I curled up in bed, doing so for at least an hour before things got weird again. To better visualize my room, I'll give a quick description. It is facing our backyard and is without its own door. It is the basement and was not intentionally designed as a bedroom, so the door it does have isn't closed it off from the rest of the house, but to exit into the backyard. The backyard itself is quite large despite the house being smaller. With the floodlights on from the upstairs kitchen as well as one next to my door, neither managed to light the entire backyard, which can be a bit creepy at times. I heard a quick bang at my door and nearly jumped out of my skin from the shock of the noise. Peering out the window from my bed across the room, I half expected some terrifying creature to reveal itself, but was met with only the sound of my cat meowing. Falling back onto my pillow and cursing my cat for scaring me like she had, I thought to myself, "You can stay outside for the rest of the night for that." A few minutes passed when I again heard meowing. I tried to ignore it, but she persisted. I figured it wasn't her fault she had scared me and I was being unreasonable not wanting to let her in. So I got out of bed, crossed the room, and reached for the door when I realized my cat was sleeping on a heap of laundry in the far side of the room. I got a horrible, sinking feeling, and I paused at the door awaiting the sound of another meow. For a few seconds, silence. Intent on discovering the origin of the noises, I meowed back and was echoed with a meow. I told myself it must be the gray cat that hangs around my window some nights and tries to pick fights with my cat, but I knew it sounded too not like a cat. So I put my face up to the window and said, "Get off my property. Meowing won't make me let you in." Silence again. Foolishly, I opened the door to look outside, thinking it had to be that gray cat. The little cat is either attention deprived or gets too much attention because when I opened my door to yell at it, instead of running it always tried to get inside. I put a foot out the door and poked my head out to see the backyard was completely empty. Not at all like that gray cat to take off when it hears noise, so again I got that sinking feeling and then meow. From just to the right of my face came another sudden meow, which sent me back inside the house faster than a bolt of lightning. I locked the door, grabbed my cat, and hurried up the stairs, turning on every light along the way. Stopping in the living room, I peered out to the front yard and across the street. The same piles of snow, sliver of a moon, and empty street awaited me there. Clutching my cat tightly into my chest, I could feel my heartbeat bouncing back from her body. I tried to calm myself while I gazed into space, not focusing on anything in particular, when something caught my eye. There, emerging from the side of my house and coming from the backyard, was that horrifying figure that had been walking on all fours. It slowly made its way to the street, crossing the road, and began to continue walking in the direction I had last seen it going, when it stopped dead in its tracks. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't help but to stare right at it when it turned its head to meet my gaze. Looking directly at me for what seemed like ages, we stared each other down. My body felt like it was about to melt through the cracks of the floors from the adrenaline pumping through me when the thing made a charge for the house. It moved lightning fast for being on all fours and having to travel across piles of snow, which only made things more terrifying. I fled the room and took refuge in the kitchen, where my cat and I spent the remainder of the night. When the morning arrived, I went back down to my room and looked outside. Nothing there but snow and hand and feet prints at the foot of my door.
This encounter happened to me about 6 years ago, when I was 16. For context, I'm female. I live in New England, where the winters are very snowy, with long, cold, dark nights and short days. One such night in February, I was alone in my parents' house, which is in a safe, quiet, suburban neighborhood where the houses are within about 100 feet of each other. My parents had divorced years before and were still on good terms, so when my mom decided to sell the childhood home, my dad bought it so I could continue living there. While in the process of moving, neither of my parents stayed at the house for a couple of nights, and only my room upstairs had furniture. The rest of the house was mostly empty, with boxes scattered around, and the internet had not yet been switched over, so I often sat at the far end of the living room and mooched off of our neighbor's Wi-Fi. It was fun not having my parents there for a couple of nights, so I stayed up late with my new laptop and surfed the web into the early hours of the morning. During my second night of being alone, it snowed late into the evening, and I sat in the dark living room on a folding chair with only my laptop screen for light, with snow falling quietly outside. The neighborhood was silent, as cars don't usually drive by past at 10 at night, and neighbors stay inside to keep warm. At 2:30 a.m., I decided to head to bed, and was wrapped up my internet activities for the night when I heard 3 very slow, quiet knocks on the front door just a few feet away. I immediately closed my laptop, knowing that the bright screen made me visible to the person outside since the windows weren't covered. I got off my chair and walked very quietly over to the door and knelt down below a window to listen outside. Frozen with fear, I waited for what was probably about 2 full minutes when I heard 3 more identical knocks. They were very slow and would have been too quiet to wake anyone up who had been sleeping. I gathered the courage to look outside through the window and saw a dark figure standing very close to the front door, dressed in a black winter coat and black pants. The hood put over his face obscured his hair and face. And he stood with his arms on his sides. I contemplated calling the police, but ultimately decided to continue waiting. I moved back behind the door, away from the window, and after about 2 more minutes pass, I could see the man walking down the walkway past the front of the house. Suddenly, he stopped, turned around and looked directly at the window through which I watched him. About 15 seconds passed as we stared at each other, but I couldn't see his face under the darkness of his hood. Finally, he turned around and walked down the driveway and down the street. He didn't stop at any other houses, just continued down the street in the falling snow, and I watched him for about 10 minutes until he faded into the darkness. As far as I know, this has not happened since then. I still live in that house and occasionally have nightmares in which the scene replays itself, except that in the dreams, I open the door for him. For a little background, I'm a 27-year-old female, and I just recently moved into a nice apartment with a safe neighborhood with my 2 dogs. I've only been in my place for about a month, and after this experience, I highly doubt I'm gonna make it here for the duration of my year-long lease. The way these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments and a fire escape door that only opens from the inside. I'm on the back-ish side of the building, which places my patio about 10 feet from the fire escape stairs. I take my dogs out 3 times a day, and every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on my patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm, and I had cracked my patio door because, well, I love cold weather and I'm an adult, and if I want to watch the snow fall, then I can do as I please. Mistake number 1. I let my guard down, because I'm stubborn. It was around 11 p.m., and I decided that it was getting late. I should take the dogs out for the night, and since they both hate snow, this would be a quick trip. I go to lock the patio door, and decide against it because I'm on the 5th floor, and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get the dogs ready, grab my keys, and lock my door as I leave the apartment. I get down to the designated pet area with my beloved snow-hating dogs and let them do their thing, and then back to the apartment we go and get back in safely, or so I thought. This is where I thought I was losing my mind, but in actuality, shit was about to get real. As soon as we walk into the apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door and I notice the door is shut and the bar is locked. Mistake number 2, I immediately think it's strange, but didn't connect the dots. I go into the kitchen to get dog treats, and both dogs start going crazy and growling at a large chest in my living room as I'm walking to see what the commotion's about. I see a pair of eyes creeping from under the chest lid. I stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what I was seeing and calmly walked towards my front door, opened it, and told my dogs, "Let's go outside," and they ran out, without leashes, and I immediately get them and myself in my car, lock the doors, and call the police. The police show up in less than 5 minutes, and they go up to my apartment, and after about 20 minutes, 2 officers are dragging a 40-ish-year-old man out of my building in cuffs, and the plot thickens. This dude had been watching me since I moved in and had been stalking out my place, waiting for an opportunity to get inside because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough already, he had a fanny pack since it was still 1990, and he had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture of me from the day I moved in, and his plan was to sneak in through my patio door, wait for me to fall asleep, and God knows what else. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for days because I thought he would come back. Luckily, he's still in jail, but I'll never forget those eyes. I'm an avid hunter. I go every season, and I love it. More often than not, I don't kill any game, but I just love getting out into the woods. I don't know if you're familiar with hunting seasons in Pennsylvania, but during late November, rifle season is in full swing. It was already the 2nd week of the season, and I had yet to bag any deer, so I was eager to get to it early in the morning. And I did. I normally get up around 5 a.m. and drive to my hunting spot. It's private land that my grandfather owns,
Him and I are the only two who hunt on it, and the rest is posted to hunters. And the only others on the land are employed on my grandfather's farm. I had originally planned on calling my grandfather when I woke up and asked him if he wanted to tag along, but the weather that morning was horrendous. Snow was pouring down and the wind was really strong. I love hunting in the snow, but it almost made me decide not to go. So I knew he wouldn't want to. The roads were really bad, so it took me a bit longer to get there. Normally the sun would be starting to rise by now, however it was overcast and snowing. Regardless of the snow, I walked up to my spot. It was directly behind my grandfather's house, over a hill, and back about 100 yards. Almost immediately upon sitting in my spot, I heard things moving all around me. Honestly, I didn't pay it much mind. It could be any number of things, but it was still pitch black, and the thought that it was a deer had crossed my mind. But there wasn't much I could do. It's not like I can shoot at it. So I just ignore it and continue to wait. It wasn't much longer after that I began hearing something walking over the ridge to my right. At this point, there's barely enough light to see my feet, so even if it was a deer, there was still nothing I could do. However, I could tell it wasn't a deer. I just assumed it was my grandfather walking to his spot, which is just a short walk from mine. But the lights in his house were off, and he was hunting up here. I'm sure he'd let me know prior. But even if it wasn't him, it was a hunter, albeit hunting illegally. I still wanted to let him know I was here, so I turned on my flashlight and pointed it in his direction, flashing it several times. Again, even if it was a deer, I couldn't shoot it, so I felt better to be safe rather than sorry. Not much happened after that. After I flashed my light, the noise stopped, which was really odd. I didn't hear them turn back, so I figured they either A, sat down right there after seeing my light, which is considered extremely rude, or B, I didn't hear them walk off. I just assumed it was the latter. An hour or so passes, and finally the first sights of daylight start to shine through. It's still snowing, and the snow is falling in entire snowballs rather than snowflakes. So, visibility is pretty limited, but I just grinned and bared it. I love snow, and even if I couldn't see any deer, I still found the weather beautiful. It was around this time that I noticed an odd-looking lump was around protruding from a group of trees and shrubs atop the hill that separates me from my granddad's house, right where I'd heard movement earlier. It looked like a mound of dirt, however it was sticking out from the side of a tree, so obviously it wasn't dirt. Naturally, I raised up my rifle to take a closer look. I could tell immediately that I was looking at the side of an older style camouflage coat. It took a minute, but it finally clicked. That was a person over there. I just thought it was a hunter, so I didn't know what to do about it. I knew he was hunting on our land illegally, and from what I could see, he wasn't wearing anything orange, which is required of all hunters during rifle season. And I could tell, just from looking, whoever this was not my grandfather. I sat there for a minute debating my next move, but I decided to call my granddad and risk of blowing his hunt if that was him over there. So without taking my eyes off this guy, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. To my dismay, he picked up, and I told him what was going on. So he told me he'd make his way up, but I decided on my own to give the guy a whistle to let him know I see him, but he didn't react at all. After a few minutes, I started to walk up to this guy. After walking a short distance, I could clearly see him, who was sound asleep tucked in between a shrub and a couple of trees. He obviously thought out where to lay down, as I would never be able to see him had his coat not stuck out. And as I thought he had no orange on, I gave him another whistle, much louder, and he woke right up, almost immediately shuffling over to hide his exposed coat. He had a nasty and scruffy beard and a gray hat. Honestly, he looked like a harmless old homeless man, probably in his 50s. But he had a perfect view of my granddad's home from his spot. and I have a pretty good idea what he was planning to do once my granddad left the house. Once this guy realized he'd been caught, he saw a mad 6'5" guy carrying a hunting rifle less than 10 yards away, making his way closer. His face went pale. Almost instantly, he tried to feed me some bullshit that he'd gotten lost during a drive with a group of other hunters. However, the closest public game land is miles from this spot, so I knew this was a lie. He just kept on going about how he was lost and he fell asleep. He even went as far as to make up a fake name on the spot. I just stood there and listened, making sure he didn't make any fishy movements. I couldn't help but think about what this guy could have done to my grandfather. God knows he had the chance, and that thought pissed me off enough to tell the guy to shut up. That's about the point where I saw my granddad. My granddad is a tough old man, so my first thought was, this idiot's gonna get himself killed. Luckily, nothing happened. After he got there, we practically had to drag this guy down to the road where my granddad called the cops, and I called my dad. Technically, this guy hadn't done anything yet, so we all could charge him with was trespassing and stalking. This was about a month ago, and since then, I haven't heard anything else about him.
So this happened over a year ago. Our oldest son, Caden, was 3 at the time, and our youngest son, Connor, was around 5 months old. It was a January evening in Pennsylvania. We had just finished eating dinner, and I planned on giving our little one a bath. My husband drives trucks for work, so he isn't home very often. It's me and the boys during the week. Caden was playing in this toy room that has a door leading to the side deck. A little detail. We have no sensor light or even a porch light on that whole side of the house. At this time, we didn't use the deck at all, only to use our grill on during the summer months. It's not close to the sidewalk or the next street over, basically an open space of yard off that deck. Anyway, Caden was playing in the toy room waiting for his turn to take a bath while I brought Connor into the bathroom. We were just about done with the bath time when I heard Caden's little feet running towards the bathroom. He stands in the door and says, "Mommy, there's a man looking in the side door. I think it's the mailman." My heart skipped a beat because 1, no mailman is coming at 7 p.m. And 2, the side door as he called it was never used, especially not in the winter. And 3, I didn't hear anyone knock. I began to sketch myself out more by thinking about how there is no light on the deck, and this person would have had to walk through the yard in the snow, walk up the back stairs of the deck, and go to that door when the front porch light was on and attached to a shovel sidewalk. I took Connor out of the bath and put him in a towel in his little chair, and told Caden to sit with his brother and to not come out until I said it was okay. He was confused but listened, just kept asking what was wrong. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, had 911 ready to call, and got my mama bear face on. When I walked to the side door, I shined the flashlight on my phone through the window of the door at a distance, walking up to it, hopefully scare someone away. The worst thought with this, as a mother, is that as I reached for the handle, I realized it was unlocked. Someone could have walked right in. I flung the door open and shined my light, held up my knife, and yelled, "Hey!" in the most threatening voice a 5'4" woman could make. There were footprints in the snow up to the deck stairs and back down going into the field and woods behind our house. I slammed the door, thoroughly freaked out, and locked it. I called the police and waited in the bathroom with the boys. While I was in there, I asked Caden, "Do we know who the man was?" He said no, but he smiled and waved at me for a long time. I asked him what he was wearing. He told me he had a hat that looked like a mailman's, and he wasn't wearing a coat. The police officer came and searched the property with flashlights before coming inside. He asked me and Caden questions and then informed me that he not only saw footprints leading up to the side deck, but to the outside door to our basement and kitchen window on the other side of the house as well. He suggested I have someone come and stay with us for the night, and they will continue to follow the footprints that were left in the snow back to the field and wood line.
My father-in-law slept on the couch that night with his gun, being the closest relative to our house. My mother was a nervous wreck, and I got very little sleep that night, and I never heard back from the police. I am guessing tracks were loose enough for the bit of the woods. Caden still mentions it from time to time, randomly, and we got a blackout curtain for that door. I'd still very much like to get better locks to be safe. My husband and my father think it might have been a man who saw me home alone while passing and wanted to hopefully sneak a peek. But why just stand and watch my child and go around the whole back of the house, not by the front door or street? Hope to never see that creep's face and hope he never smiles or waves to my child again.